Welcome friends to Broken Narratives. I am your host Jay Firangi, coming to you from the Still City, Hamilton, Ontario. Today's episode is going to be about companies that produced vaccines for COVID-19. I want to give you some background on these companies before I start discussing vaccines themselves. This is going to be a short episode. I will discuss the influence of pharma companies on news media and on politicians in US, the criminal histories of J&J and Pfizer in the past, also recent times, some background information on Moderna, some very disturbing details of Pfizer BioNtech vaccine contracts with many nations. First few clips are from 2017 and you will hear Mike Papaantonio, who is an American civil lawsuit trial lawyer. Papaantonio co-hosts the Ring of Fire, a nationally syndicated progressive weekly radio program, and he has been inducted into the Trial Lawyer Hall of Fame. So in this first clip, you will hear him talk about influence of pharma companies on major news networks in US.
With the exception of CBS, every major media outlet in the United States shares at least one board member with at least one pharmaceutical company. Let me put that into perspective. These board members wake up, they go to a meeting at Merck or Pfizer, then they have their driver take them over to a meeting with NBC to decide what kind of programming that network is going to air. And for those board members who aren't pulling double duty with a media conglomerate and a big drug company, they still understand that they can't be mean to Big Pharma because Big Pharma pays their bills. Drug companies spend about $5 billion a year on advertising with these media outlets. So when you have a case against Pfizer or Merck or Eli Lilly or any of the other major pharmaceutical companies, do you think those board members are going to let you get on the air and tell a story that's bad about what they do? Or are you naive enough to believe that they really don't interfere with the day-to-day operation? These gigantic media corporations aren't going to do a thing to threaten their relationship with their biggest advertisers. And one way or another, they're always going to express the ideological views of their owners, their corporate owners.
So most of these news networks in US are not independent. As you heard, they have board members from pharmaceutical companies and they spend collectively more than $5 billion a year on advertisings. And let's see some examples of that. And this is just regarding Pfizer and how they sponsor so many segments of news in US.
Good Morning America is brought to you by Pfizer.
CBS Health Watch sponsored by Pfizer.
Anderson Cooper 360. Brought to you by Pfizer.
ABC News Nightline. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Making a difference. Brought to you by Pfizer.
CNN Tonight. Brought to you by Pfizer. Early Start. Brought to you by Pfizer. Friday night on Aaron Burnett Out Front. Brought to you by Pfizer.
This Week with George Stephanopoulos is brought to you by Pfizer.
This weather report brought to you by Pfizer.
Today's countdown to the royal wedding is brought to you by Pfizer.
And now a CBS Sports Update brought to you by Pfizer.
Meet the Press Data Download brought to you by Pfizer.
And in this second clip, Mike Papaantonio will discuss how people are losing faith in mainstream news media because of these reasons, that they have influence of pharmaceutical industries, and also how pharmaceutical industries also lobby politicians and influence their behavior as well.
Fortunately, an increasing number of Americans are starting to wake up and realize that the mainstream media should not be trusted. In recent years, we've seen the alternative media experience rapid growth. Mainstream media has been losing credibility at a staggering rate, and Americans are starting to look elsewhere for the truth about what's really going on. But the media is only one side of the story here. Big Pharma knows that if they want to continue manipulating the public, we have to start with our elected officials in Washington, Washington, D.C. According to Open Secrets, Big Pharma spent more than $58 million on politicians in 2016, the most amount they've ever spent on direct contributions in the last quarter century. Why? Because they, big drug companies, want politicians to do what they order them to do. And when it comes to lobbying, few industries spend more than Big Pharma. Last year, the industry spent a staggering $244 million to influence our elected leaders in Washington, D.C. And it looks like things are about to get much, much worse.
And now let's look at some past criminal history of these companies, beginning with J&J. And in this next clip, you will hear how J&J has been sued by many people over the years for their products, and they had to pay large sums of money to individuals and to settle those criminal and civil lawsuits.
Johnson & Johnson.
Johnson & Johnson.
Johnson & Johnson company has faced tens of thousands of lawsuits claiming the talc has caused users to develop ovarian cancer or mesothelioma.
According to the American Cancer Society, talc, a mineral known for its softness, can contain asbestos, a substance known to cause cancer.
1997 memo from Johnson & Johnson's own consultant, who acknowledged that many studies did show an association between talc use and ovarian cancer.
Reuters has examined documents that reveal the company knew about the presence of small amounts of asbestos in its products as far back as 1957.
In May 2016, a second jury ordered Johnson & Johnson to pay $55 million to another woman who says the company's talcum powder caused her to develop ovarian cancer.
Johnson & Johnson and 3 of its subsidiaries have agreed to pay more than $2.2 billion to resolve criminal as well as civil claims that they marketed prescription drugs for uses that were never approved as safe and effective, and that they paid kickbacks to both physicians and pharmacies for prescribing and promoting these drugs.
So these were not just mistakes, as you heard that they knew that there was asbestos in their talc powder since 1957, and in 1997 they knew that asbestos can cause ovarian cancer, but they still were selling those products. And you also heard about paying kickbacks to doctors to promote drugs that which were not safe and effective. So they had to pay $2.2 billion fine for that. And now let's see some past criminal history of Pfizer.
The world's largest drug maker, Pfizer, agreed today to pay the biggest fine in history to settle fraud charges involving marketing drugs for uses that weren't approved by the FDA. The company will pay a record $2.3 billion in civil and criminal penalties after admitting that the painkiller Bextra and 12 other drugs were promoted for what's known as off-label use, which the FDA says put public health at risk in the process.
This is the 4th Pfizer settlement with the Justice Department this decade. First, in 2002, Pfizer paid $49 million to resolve allegations that it had failed to report to CMS best prices for its drug Lipitor. Second, in May 2004, Pfizer paid $430 million, including a $240 million criminal fine for the off-label promotion of the drug Neurontin. Third, in April 2007, Pfizer and its pharmacy and Upjohn division, the same division involved here, pled guilty and entered into a deferred prosecution agreement for payment of kickbacks and for off-label promotion of the drug Genotropin. That time, Pfizer paid $34.7 million.
It's a notorious 1996 drug experiment that Pfizer conducted on sick children in Nigeria when researchers selected 200 children at an epidemic hospital for an experimental trial. About 100 of the kids were given an untested oral version of the antibiotic Trovan. But Pfizer did not tell their parents their children were getting the experimental drug. 11 children died. Others suffered disabling injuries, including deafness, muteness, paralysis, brain damage, loss of sight, slurred speech. After an 11-year legal battle, Pfizer paid compensation to 4 families.
If you look at this thing, and I mean, if Pfizer is too big to fail, and even the biggest fine in history is just a few months' profit, then what's going to stop it from illegally promoting other drugs?
Critics say Anderson nothing.
So same as J&J, Pfizer was also promoting drugs that were not approved for the disease, and they also conducted experiment and gave experimental drugs to children in Nigeria, as you heard, and 11 of them died, and So many of them had devastating injuries from that drug. So yeah, even $2.3 billion, which was the largest fine paid by any company in US, was just like a few months profit for them. So they continue to do their business as usual, and this was all before COVID-19 pandemic. So when people ask me, or people who are not trusting of these pharmaceutical companies and governments as well regarding their products, these are some of the reasons that it is very difficult to trust these companies. Now let's come back to the pandemic, and I have a couple of articles to go through regarding Moderna. And this first one is from the CNN. In quest for vaccine, US makes big bet on company with unproven technology. This was published in May 2020. And here are some details. Established in 2010, Moderna has never brought a product to market or gotten any of its 9 or so vaccine candidates approved for use by the FDA. It has also never brought a product to the third and final phase of a clinical trial. Major funding injected into vaccine race. The effort received another boost on April 16th when the Federal Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority awarded Moderna up to $483 million to accelerate the development and manufacturing of the vaccine. Johnson & Johnson receiving $456 million. So Moderna, which had never had any products in the market since its inception in 2010, and never even brought any of the product for a final phase of clinical trial, was given more than $400 million for COVID-19 vaccine development. And also you heard J&J was also given large sum of money for COVID-19 vaccine development. Here is another article from the New York Times. This is also regarding Moderna. Trump's vaccine chief has vast ties to drug industry, posing possible conflicts. And again from May 2020. The scientist Moncef Slavi is a venture capitalist and former long-time executive at GlaxoSmithKline. Most recently, he sat on the board of Moderna. He resigned when President Trump named him last Thursday to the new post as chief advisor for Operation Warp Speed, the federal drive for coronavirus vaccines and treatment. The value of his stock holding in Moderna jumped nearly $2.4 million to $12.4 million when the company released preliminary. Dr. Slavi sold his shares on Tuesday, and the administration said he would donate the increased value to cancer research. So the guy who was sitting on the board of Moderna was appointed as a chief advisor for Operation Warp Speed by President Donald Trump. And as you heard that he was going to give his earnings from his stocks to cancer research, but still he has conflict of interest. And later on in this article it goes into more details that here it says he still holds just under $10 million in GlaxoSmithKline stocks and remains. GSK and Sanofi have become partners in creating a vaccine candidate against the coronavirus. So those companies that he had investment in, they were also trying to develop COVID-19 vaccines. So if he's on the advisory board and going to approve treatments for COVID-19, he had conflict of interest. But here in this article they go through how he was going to avoid those issues and be neutral on those issues. Now let's get back to Pfizer, and next set of clips I have are from WIOM. This is an Indian online news outlet, and you will hear Palki Sharma, host of the show, go in details of how Pfizer was bullying countries when it comes to their contracts to get COVID-19 vaccines. And this first clip is detailed, as you will hear details of Pfizer's demands on Argentina when it comes to getting secure vaccines from them.
The US-based company Pfizer is holding governments to ransom, interfering with their legislation, even demanding military bases as guarantee. Would you believe it? A vaccine maker asking for a country's military base in return for vaccines. Let's start with Argentina. Talks between Argentina and Pfizer began in June 2020. In July, President Alberto Fernandez held a meeting with Pfizer's CEO in Argentina. Guess what followed? Pfizer asked to be compensated for the cost of any future lawsuits. What does that mean? Say someone files a civil lawsuit against Pfizer in Argentina, and if that person wins the case, who pays the compensation? It won't be Pfizer. It would be the government of Argentina. Now, Argentina had never done this before, but it made an exception. It needed life-saving vaccines, and desperate times call for desperate measures. So Argentina's parliament passed a new law in October 2020. But Pfizer was unhappy with its phrasing. The law said Pfizer needs to at least pay for negligence, for its own mistakes, if it happens to make any in future. Pfizer rejected this. It won't pay for its mistakes. Argentina then offered to amend the law to define negligence more clearly, to include only vaccine distribution and delivery under negligence. Pfizer was still not happy. It demanded the law be amended through a new decree. That's when Argentina put its foot down. They refused. Pfizer then asked Argentina to buy an international insurance. What for? To pay for potential future cases against the company. Argentina agreed. In December 2020, Pfizer came back with more demands. It wanted sovereign assets as collateral. What does that mean? Pfizer wanted Argentina to put, and listen to this, put its bank reserves, its military bases, and its embassy buildings at stake as collateral.
And these clips are from February 2021. And let's hear more details of Pfizer's demands on different governments. And this one is with Brazilian government, and what kind of demands it was making on Brazil when it comes to securing vaccines from them.
What did Pfizer do in Brazil? The world's third most affected country. Pfizer went a step ahead and asked Brazil to create a guarantee fund and deposit money in a foreign bank account. On the 23rd of January 2021, Brazil's health ministry put out this statement, citing excerpts from Pfizer's pre-contract clauses. These are Pfizer's demands. Look at this. Number one, Brazil waives the sovereignty of its assets abroad in favor of Pfizer. This is a vaccine company. Number two, that the rules of the land be not applied on Pfizer. Number three, that Brazil take into consideration a delay in delivery. Number four, that Pfizer is not penalized for a delay in delivery. And number five, in case of any side effects, Pfizer be exempted from all civil liability. The government of Brazil calls these clauses abusive. And they're right. It goes without saying, the Pfizer deal with Brazil failed too.
And while Pfizer was demanding these kind of things from developing countries, at the same time it was largely funded for its production of COVID-19 vaccines by governments. And in this next clip you will hear how Pfizer was given large sums of money by Germany and US to start producing vaccines for COVID-19.
Pfizer is playing with life-saving drugs. It is abusing its position, and having developed a vaccine with the help of government funding, it is now throwing tantrums at governments. Did you know that Pfizer's German partner BioNtech was given $445 million by the government of Germany? The US paid Pfizer $2 billion as early as July 2020. This was against pre-orders. Pfizer is looking at making $15 billion from vaccine sales this year. It is in talks with 100 countries and organizations. There is no dearth of money for this company. Why then is Pfizer bent on squeezing desperate countries of their assets? On the 22nd of January, Pfizer signed an agreement with COVAX, the Global Vaccine Alliance. It committed 40 million doses to poor countries this year. And the company put out a press release. You must listen to what they say. I want to read out a particular quote from Pfizer Chairman and CEO Albert Bourla. At Pfizer, he says, we believe that every person deserves to be seen, heard, and cared for. And that's why, from the very beginning of our vaccine development program, Pfizer and BioNTech have been firmly committed to working towards equitable and affordable access of COVID-19 vaccines for people around the world. Does this make you angry too?
So as you heard from previous clips that kind of clauses they were trying to put on this on those agreements with those nations, that this company was not working on a good faith and trying to provide affordable vaccines to everyone. And now I want to go through a couple of articles regarding immunity for pharmaceutical companies when it comes to if anything goes wrong, if you have a bad reaction to the vaccine and if you get hurt, what happens. So that was not just for Argentina, Brazil and those kind of developing or underdeveloped countries, but it was same for US as well. This article is from CNBC, and here are some details. If you experience severe side effects after getting a COVID vaccine, lawyers tell CNBC there is basically no one to blame in a US court of law. The federal government has granted companies like Pfizer and Moderna immunity from liability if something unintentionally goes wrong with their vaccines. And here is another article of Johnson & Johnson's lawsuits and settlement from during the pandemic time. CBS News. Johnson & Johnson agrees to pay $230 million to settle New York opioid claim. This was published in June 2021. Johnson & Johnson has agreed to pay $230 million to New York State to settle claims that the pharmaceutical giant helped fuel the opioid crisis, Attorney General Letitia James said on Saturday. And this was part of a slew of litigation over an epidemic linked to nearly 500,000 deaths over the last 2 decades. So, and there were more companies involved in this lawsuit, and total fine was $26 billion, and J&J's part of that was only $230 million. So many people in US during the pandemic, that number increased, as I have discussed before. The number of people who are dying from drug overdose and those kind of things increased. More than 100,000 people were dying in 2021 onwards due to drug overdose and issues related to that. And most of these people get hooked to this kind of drugs, starting from prescription drugs, not drugs that they buy from drug dealers outside, but prescription drugs, painkillers, those kind of drugs which are prescribed by doctors who are also taking kickbacks from these pharmaceutical companies, as you heard in the previous reports. And let's continue with the next report. And again, this is from WION. This is from October 2021, and Gravitas had some more details how Pfizer was using those contracts to silence governments.
8 months have passed since we reported this. Pfizer has not changed. It is still putting profits above public health. It is still forcing governments to bend to its will. An advocacy group has thrown up more details of what Pfizer does. It has accessed some confidential contracts of Pfizer, and we have a copy. These contracts are with 9 countries and blocks, and the details are shocking. Desperate countries are being forced to make humiliating concessions to Pfizer. We went through the entire report. We found 6 very important points worth highlighting. Number 1, Pfizer has the right to silence governments. It has forced countries to not talk about the deals they strike for shots. Number 2, Pfizer controls the donations of its shots, not the country that buys them. Pfizer will decide where the shots go. Number 3, Pfizer has secured an intellectual property waiver for itself, and this clause is particularly disturbing. If Pfizer is accused of intellectual property theft, governments will pay, not the company. Number 4, If there are disputes, private arbitrators and not public courts will decide on them. Number 5, Pfizer can go after state assets to secure its compensation. And number 6, Pfizer calls the shots on all key decisions. It decides delivery timelines and more.
And there was a lawsuit launched by Moderna against Pfizer regarding their technology, mRNA technology, I think, and I'm not sure what happened with that lawsuit. I haven't followed up on that. Maybe I will do that in later episodes. And here is one more clip from during the pandemic. This is from July 2021 when Pfizer had to pay more fines when because they had jacked up price of an emergency medicine.
Pfizer's EpiPens may have set consumers back $600, but it's now costing the drug maker a whole lot more. Pfizer has agreed to pay $345 million to resolve claims by consumers who allege they overpaid for the device that treats allergic reactions. The lawsuit had accused the maker of the emergency drug Pfizer and the company that markets it, Mylan, of engaging in anti-competitive behavior that allowed them to maintain a monopoly in the market for those handheld devices. The proposed class action settlement comes 5 years after Mylan sparked public outrage over the high cost of medicines. The drug maker jacked up the price of a pair of EpiPens to $600 in 2016 from $100 in 2008. Pfizer did not admit wrongdoing. The company did not immediately respond to a request for comment.
So Pfizer had continued their criminal behavior throughout the years and decades and still does that, and people still want to trust them, which is very difficult for me and people who are aware of these kind of issues that has been going on for a long time. And next two clips, these are last two clips of this episode, and these are from European Union. You will hear Cristian Terhes. I'm not sure if I pronounce his last name right. And he's currently serving as a member of European Parliament. He's a Romanian politician, and he's from a Christian Democratic National Peasants Party, PNT-CD. And you will hear similar things that you heard from Pfizer's dealings with Argentina and Brazil and many more developing countries. Similar things were going on in Europe as well. The contracts European Union had signed with Pfizer, even the representatives of people, members of parliament, were not able to access those contracts, and they had to force European Union and do a lot of work to get those contracts. And this is first clip. You will just hear introduction regarding this from Cristian Terhes.
So after a lot of pressure in the parliament, as the article says, these contracts were disclosed to us and to the public. And I want to show you some of those pages. And you tell me if this...
I played the wrong clip. This is the wrong clip. Let me play the first clip here.
But there's the other aspect. And the question that I address not only to you in the parliament, but to every European citizen, to ask your own governments. Were you properly informed about what is going on? Because we had a lot of debates at the beginning of this year in the parliament where we demanded full access to the contracts signed between these companies that produce the vaccines and the European Union. And I quote from an article in Euroactiv, who says the following in an article from January 22nd, 2021, that says the following. The contract signed between pharmaceutical company and the European Commission in November of 2020 was made available to MAPS on Tuesday in a redacted format after the company agreed to open the contract up to scrutiny. Say what? Say what? So you're imposing a medical product on the European citizens without them knowing what's in these contracts. Not only them knowing, but us, we don't know.
So as you know, vaccine mandates were placed on a population all around the world, and Europe, in some European countries it was worst. I have seen videos where like people were not even allowed to buy groceries. Even grocery stores they could not enter without vaccine passports, and nobody even could see those contracts, what was in those contracts, not people, not even members of parliament. And as you see, there were only 6 members of parliament in European Union who were standing up for their people to get details of those contracts, so they can see if they had similar clause as Pfizer had and other companies had with other developing countries as well. And Cristian Terhes will give more details in this last clip.
So after a lot of pressure in the parliament, as the article says, these contracts were disclosed to us and to the public. And I want to show you some of those pages. And you tell me if this is okay for the European citizens to be exposed to this situation where they cannot come to work, they cannot enter a store, they cannot go with their kids to schools, where they cannot freely move from one country to another, unless in one situation is vaccinated with one of these products. So these are the contracts that were disclosed by the Commission with the approval of the company. This is unheard of. And I will just show you the pages. These are the pages. You see?
They call this transparency these days.
So this is the fundamental principle, right, of democracy. I'm asking you guys, is this transparency? Do you see anything? Because we don't.
Yeah, so even the contracts were released after getting approval from those private companies. And they had to force them, those few representatives who stood up for their people had to force the parliament to produce those contracts. And let's just see some 3 more articles towards the end of this episode. And this is regarding how much money these companies made. CNBC, the COVID pandemic drives Pfizer's 2022 revenue to a record $100 billion. So this was just in 2022. And here is for Moderna. Moderna COVID vaccine sales plunged by 2/3 in 2023, but meets company's $6 billion forecast. But here it says, but revenue from the shot fell about 2/3 from the more than $18 billion it booked in 2022. So the company who had never had any product in the market now was making billions of dollars, and the initial investment was made by governments, and they had immunity and this kind of stuff, and all the responsibility and fallback, if there is any, was on people who were forced to take those shots. And here is one last example of Pfizer's wrongdoing from 2024. This is from February 2024. Pfizer agrees to pay $93 million to settle Lipitor antitrust lawsuits. So to summarize, these companies, especially J&J and Pfizer, have extensive criminal history, and they have been promoting those drugs that were harmful to people and were not approved for those use, and they got funding for their COVID-19 vaccine productions from government, and they had immunity. They were not liable. They were asking for sovereign assets from governments to for in exchange for the vaccines. And these are the companies that mainstream news media wants you to trust and take their products without questioning them. And even though the process of developing these vaccines were like astronomically fast compared to traditional vaccines, and you will learn about that more in coming episodes. So this brings me to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for watching Broken Narratives, and you can check out the show notes if you want to confirm any of the details. I don't have video links for a couple of clips that I have used in this show, but if you find some, you can send it to me. I will add that to show notes as well. And once again, thank you very much. And you've been listening Broken Narratives. I am your host, Jay Firangi, coming to you from Still City, Hamilton, Ontario, and I will see you in the next episode.